and a more inclusive national policy framework. And I'm willing to say that we need to go back to the original days of President Kapa in his first term, which really did a lot of work to reform local government frameworks. So we need newer frameworks for local governance to go along with this DERA that we have. So over the next 25 years, we need to go back and say what worked, in our local governance frameworks in the past 25 years, and really be honest about what did not work. Fix that as we go towards the implementation of the DERA 2050. So I think that's how we crack that problem. To recap, how we bridge the gap between community priorities and national policy making is one, by investing in listening infrastructures, and two, by reimagining and revamping local government to be more citizen driven. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Justice, for that insightful presentation. And we've gotten to understand pretty much how the civil society helps the sustainability agenda. Now we're moving on to the private sector. And I would like to take this juncture to turn the attention to Santina Majengo, a business and leadership advocate who's at the intersection of promoting the private sector initiatives in Tanzania at the CEO Roundtable. Santina, you'll get an opportunity to introduce yourself, but let me lay the question to you. What performance metrics should guide businesses to ensure their growth is both sustainable and inclusive? And be mindful that right here we're talking about the private sector, the role that the private sector plays. So what performance metrics now guide businesses in Tanzania and beyond? Santina, karibu.
Asante. Thank you so much, Mpoki, for that question. By introduction, my name is Santina Majengo Benson. I'm the Executive Director of the CEO Roundtable of Tanzania. I think this is really an excellent dialogue. And interestingly, at the CEO Roundtable, we have over 200 CEOs who are cutting across sectors. But we're underpinned by a guideline that is ethical leadership for growth and prosperity. So interesting that the word prosperity is actually linked to this afternoon's dialogue. Now, I think it was about 10 years ago, to your question, Mpoki, it was about 10 years ago where we were challenging ourselves. If we're talking about ethical leadership and we're talking about prosperity, what does that actually mean in the Tanzanian context and in terms of impact as well? And we're actually recognizing that there can be no real business sustainability if you're not impacting sustainability overall. In today's dialogue context of sustainability, we've seen people, we've seen planet and prosperity as well. So what we've done is look at how each of these frameworks can be driven by private sector development. We heard Zwena gave some excellent examples of how Vodacom are doing it. But broadly speaking, if I were to touch on people, we heard Dr. Crispin talk about how this is a core pillar within DERA 2050. There's a vision to have at least 25% of Tanzanians going into higher education. What we've recognized is there is too much working in silos to achieve some of these great visions that we have. And what I mean by that is it will require both the private sector, it will require academia, and it will require the youth to actually come to the table and say, what is it that we're looking to achieve in the next 30 years? And how are we actually going to get there? And what we're seeing is that there's been historically, to Prince's question, can we take some reflections? Historically, there's been too many youth who are going into tertiary education. And is the private sector able to absorb them? Not so much. And are they maybe fit for purpose in terms of where the private sector is being driven? Not always. So we've really been working to dialogue in terms of how can we change this mindset shift, right? It requires a mindset shift in terms of tertiariness maybe being the better education and not necessarily vocational. Vocational should also have an excellent focus in terms of the private sector drive. So when you talk about globally competitive, it will require talent, people who can actually innovate, who have the right skill sets to really be competitive in this space. And when you talk about globally competitive, it means that our talent shouldn't just be thinking about what jobs, what opportunities are available in Tanzania, but we should be thinking about the region, Pan-African context, and globally. Tanzania is really uniquely positioned, both from a competitive and comparative advantage. We've known that for many years. How are we utilizing the resource that we have, which is people, to actually shape the way in which we grow in the Pan-African context? So there's definitely an opportunity there, and private sector role is to help build that capacity, to help develop those skills, but very much working in tandem with government and academia to ensure that the skill sets are correct and fit for purpose. There's work that's been going on in the background to support that, but a lot more work is needed in that space. In Planet, an area that as CEO Roundtable, we're also very passionate about, but I mentioned that there was a recognition that there can be no long-term growth if you're not thinking about sustainability. And that refers to climate action and climate change. If your business is thriving from a financial performance view, and that's all the only thing you're looking at, you're not taking into consideration the many critical issues that have been happening in terms of floods, droughts, etc. And this is all linked to climate action. So as an organization, we have taken on an initiative that's called Business and Sustainability. And it's really about building awareness, developing the capacity within private sector companies to understand why climate is so critical, and how actually it makes business sense if we adopt the right parameters. To give some examples, we've seen now that we have a very big target to achieve between 30 and 35% reduction of carbon emissions by the year 2030. We know that this will be a private sector-led initiative. If private sector are not on this journey, we won't be able to achieve this. So how do we motivate and incentivize? And this is where now the collaboration between private sector and government is so critical, because we probably need the policy incentives to ensure that companies, for example, can shift their model from traditional uses of energy to more efficient uses of energy, as an example. Zuena mentioned about the role of financial institutions in driving some of these initiatives. It's very critical when you're talking about planet. We're already seeing great initiatives that are coming out from CRDB and NMB, but there needs to be a significant scale up in terms of the green finance model. At CRT, we have started developing knowledge, and this is an area where I think it's so critical that Mwananchi are hosting this, because we need this information to be disseminated across the country. It can't be sitting in silos. So if, for example, I see an opportunity and I'm a young entrepreneur sitting in Morogoro, how do I get the right information? How do I get the right financial access to make sure that I'm addressing a potential problem with a solution that is relevant for the climate action roadmap? So there's a lot of work that's required to bring the right people to the table to say, how do we stop working in business as usual models? Because everything will require disruption if we're actually going to be able to achieve some of these visions that we have. And finally, on prosperity, I think if you ask 5 people what prosperity means, you'll get 5 different answers. But from I would say not just a private sector perspective, but I think for all of us who are sitting here, I think prosperity must mean impact. And again, Zuena set the stage really well by saying impact is a long-term gain. But now that we have that roadmap for the next 25 years, how are we bringing the right people to the table to really make sure that we now implement in a strategic manner and address some of those bottlenecks that have stopped us from really unlocking and catalyzing impactful transformation. Thank you, Mpoki. I don't see you, but yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Sanchina, for that. I like one thing that you said, that we need to break the silos for true sustainability to happen, and that now when anyone be it in private, public, civil, when they think sustainability, that should actually equate to the long-term growth right now and in the future. Now, when we're breaking that silos, trust is actually that currency, right? To break that silos. And most time, it's actually the missing currency in partnerships. So over to Justice. What practical approaches have you seen work when it comes to building genuine long-term trust among diverse array of actors?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Zoe. And let me also begin with a note that is more on the general side of things when it comes to partnerships and trust in that regard. I think the world needs more generalists, and certainly our country, Tanzania, does as well. So we partner with private sector organizations, like Vodacom, Stanbic. I think the reason we are able to break new ground and to be able to partner with them is because we transform the institution to take a more general or generalist approach, rather than being super specialists in civil society and grant making. These remain and will remain our core strengths, but they're not necessarily oriented to give value to potential partners outside of our own donors. So long-lasting partnerships really require a nuanced understanding that goes beyond, the very rigid, very specialized thinking. In that regard, I think generalists are often the ones to make those unorthodox, rather, partnerships work. So much of how we plan development depends on how we organize human capital. So that I think there's a need to have a strategy that either puts more generalists in positions of influence, or a strategy that acknowledges and appreciates that a multi-sectoral, a multidisciplinary approach is the way to go, is the way forward. So that is from a point of view of orientation as a nation. But coming, to more practical issues, we need to, if we are to really build that trust or operate on a basis of trust, we must move beyond the transaction, acknowledging that this is a capitalist world and money is very important. But I think when money is front and center, what that tends to do is really overshadow the true value and purpose of partnership, and allow me to give an example, for instance. And, since we entered these partnerships with the likes of Vodacom, I've had many instances of people approaching me and asking me for help. How do I create that linkage to this private sector organization? What language do I speak? My advice has always been, first, spend time to understand your own intentions, not even their intentions or their problems, your own intentions in this endeavor. And not to sound like I'm gatekeeping this relationship, but I think, and what we've truly come to understand as we've sought to build more cross-sectoral partnerships is that clarity on intentions is perhaps the most important thing. And we know for sure that partnerships that are based on first, figuring out and then nurturing areas of shared value, they are the ones that tend to last, as opposed to the more transactional partnerships. Secondly, let me say that money is not the only misguided incentive, because people compete for attention. In fancy corporate language, you may call it visibility, but to be more crude, sometimes people compete for fame, people compete for influence. And these things are not inherently bad, but in many times, in many cases, they are counterproductive to the goal of advancing shared value. Because they really distort priorities and turn what would be collaborators into competitors, or just two parties that don't speak to each other, or are not interested in speaking to each other. And I think this has been the setup for a very long time, up until the last few years, where we are ushering in a new era of multidisciplinary, multi-sectoral partnership based on appreciation of what each other brings to the table. So I'll say trust is built when partners feel safe enough to put purpose before the competing incentives that I spoke about. And largely, you may ask, how may you apply this insight? I think it's universal. It's universal, even in friendships, in marriage. I think the concepts are universal in any type of partnership, but more so it becomes more useful to consider them as we pursue sort of public-private civil society partnerships, because that's the only way we deliver development. As Zuena has said, as Santina has echoed, no one party can do this alone. So we need each other. So if we need each other, then we must be able to come to a point where we build relationships that are based on trust. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Justice. You've unpacked trust, partnership, and collaboration in a way that is very practical. Now, I want to go on to Zuena, and the theme is the same, talking about partnerships, and practically in your area of operation. You're in the telecom space, you're in the technology space. We've talked at length about the role of women, youth, and underserved populations at scale. I want you to tell us now, how can technology-led collaborations catalyze achievement in Tanzania as far as quality of life for these particular areas that we've mapped out, areas concerning women, youth, and underserved populations? How can technology-led collaborations catalyze development in these thematic areas? Karibu Zuena.
Thank you again, Poki. Maybe just if I just start with the fact that, the beauty of designing for people, the beauty of technology in its entirety, the beauty of co-creation is that from the onset, you and everyone that's involved in that design process, whether it's you're designing an innovative solution for people, whether it's innovating solution for your business, it is that you act as a catalyst. And I really like the way you have approached this question, is that catalysts of achievements, especially with regards to goal 2, in terms of high quality of life and well-being of people. Now, 2 decades ago, connectivity was just about voice and data. It was really about how are we bridging distance, meaning that, you want to reach somewhere that is someone that is 2-3 countries away from you, or someone that is 1,000 kilometers away from you, and it has to be on the go. You had your mobile phones, some as big as bricks that are building houses now, and so forth. But it was really about convenience and connecting the world and bridging that distance. Today, connectivity is referred to an infrastructure that can change lives. And there is no one sector that exists, whether, in agriculture, in education, in health and whatnot, that the technology sector is not touching. So we are I would say, the centerpiece or the focal point for all things innovation, all things accessibility, all things quality of life. But we are more than just an infrastructure. And at Vodacom, we believe in the fact that either marginalized groups, vulnerable groups are also included in what we do. Now, from digital financial services to cybersecurity to data protection, all of that is about reaching people's potential and also ensuring that ease to use, affordability, and trust is at the center of what we deploy to our people. The mobile money ecosystem was born of policy foresight, private sector investment, and it has reduced barriers of millions and millions of people, not just in Tanzania, but also in neighboring countries and also in some parts of Asia as well. But it's also about how are we creating new economic opportunities, particularly for women and rural communities, serving the underserved. Now, I've always said this, I think 3-4 years ago, I was sitting on a panel at CSO Week. I said that then, I will say it now again, is that there's one thing in terms of access. Usage is a completely different thing. We can deploy technology everywhere in Tanzania if we want to, but if people don't have the right tools to use what we're deploying, the right literacy levels to use the digital tools that we are deploying, then we're just speaking to ourselves. We're speaking to the very few that have the smartphones. We're speaking to the very few that know how to use your ChatGPT and your AI platforms that are out there. But we're still investing, and we will keep investing, because we believe that at some point, all the different partners that bring this together are catalysts to what we want to achieve and how we want to improve lives. A perfect example with regards to partnerships is our public-private partnership flagship solution, M-Mama. The government, you have your development partners, you have us as Vodafone Foundation coming in, acting as critical resources to ensure that mothers and newborns have access to a life-changing platform. It's not rocket science. It's literally someone just dialing 115 and they're able to access emergency transportation services to get to a facility where they're taken care of, thus reducing maternal mortality rates, and now looking after even the newborns for the 12 months after they're born. So there's quite a lot that can be shaped to change, to improve lives and to ensure well-being of women, youth, and underserved populations at scale. Another great example is our work with the UCSAF, Universal Communication Service Access Fund. UCSAF, ourselves, you have the government, you have the World Bank, all of us come together because we understand the critical need of services in rural communities. This time last year, I think there were dialogues around energy, around accessibility, and in those dialogues, you have your technology sector, you have your telecom sector missing in action and not being part of that conversation. It's critical to have the telecom sector in those conversations, because I'll tell you why. Today, if I'm deploying a site somewhere in rural Tanzania, I would also need grid to be there, electricity to be there. I would also need roads and other infrastructure to be there to be able to provide support. Over and above that, it's the usage side. Now we talk about access to affordable smartphones, access to affordable devices, so that Mwananchi and citizens are able to access the resources, get online, and be able to communicate with their loved ones, but also transact and access the many different products and services that we, the technology sector, deploy. So there is quite a lot that we're doing, and collaborations really catalyze achievement and the progress that we want to see for Tanzania. If you look at the Vision 2050, we talk about digital infrastructure and digital transformation. Transformation will be there, but transformation is not possible without people. And I think throughout the chain, if the people are not involved, not just on the design process, but ensuring that they are able to access these services and use these services, then we are just revolving in the same circle, and we'll find ourselves again 25 years down the line speaking on the same topic, and the people are not involved. So yeah.
Thank you, Zuena. I like what you say, that transformation is also really about people at the end of the day. And for it to be of a great quality, it also has to be about a mindset change, so that inclusion can be furthered in Tanzania. Now, back to you, Santina. You mentioned something about enhancing business mindsets among the private sector leaders. What do you really think are those core shifts in leadership mindsets that are really needed for Tanzanian business to prioritize, this people, planet, and prosperity agenda, or sustainability agenda?
Thank you for that, Prudence. I think I'll touch on two main things in terms of mindset shift. So first, I think we, as private sector, we need to shift from corporate social responsibilities, CSR mindset, to sustainability mindset, right? And we're already seeing that shift within some of the large corporates, but it needs to trickle down in terms of the impact that sustainability initiatives would have at community level versus corporate social responsibility initiatives, which are more of a handout, right? So we still have to work towards building that understanding of why these two are very different, and why it's more important that you take your CSR dollars and actually put them into your sustainability bucket and empower the communities, rather than give them something that they can just use, and when you leave, it's gone. So I think in terms of leadership mindset shift, that's one. It's definitely a journey. We're not where we were 10 years ago. It's shifted significantly. I think organizations like Vodacom are absolutely a testament to that. And we're seeing more and more, especially driven by this idea of collaboration. When you have an initiative that is sustainable and you're bringing on partners to really drive that, it really makes a significant impact. So in terms of leadership mindset, that's one. The second one I would say that's really critical is a collaboration versus competition mindset, right? And whilst we're seeing it's starting to shift as well, but it's not anywhere where it needs to be, especially when you're looking at things from a sectoral perspective. How are you going to get, for example, the financial sector to collaboratively approach a problem in terms of providing the right access, the right to farmers, for example? How do you get a leader to take off that competitive hat and put on the collaboration hat? At the end of the day, they will always have that competition. So how can we make collaboration a strategic way forward? And how do we drive that where you're looking at it from a business growth perspective? And when you're looking at the competition element, one area that we're still seeing is not necessarily all leaders are understanding that sustainability is business, right? So it makes business sense to look at your sustainability performance measures rather than just looking at the financial performance. If you're purely looking at financial performance, you're in it for the short game. If you're looking at sustainability performance, it's definitely the long-term gain. And from a competitive perspective, that's where you'll end up in front. But in the short term, it may hurt, right? Because it requires huge investments. It requires a lot of capacity development, et cetera. And so how do you scale up in a way that's sustainable as well for your organization, whilst your competitors may come ahead of the journey in terms of financial performance? And this is where what I alluded to earlier in terms of the policy frameworks being so critical. So even when we're looking at the TDV 2050 framework, it's really critical to say that these are parameters that we want to achieve, what policy incentives and imperatives are critical to actually help unlock some of that. But having said that, because I do represent the leaders, the journey has already started, and we're seeing fantastic examples where there's excellent collaboration. And those who have said, actually, we recognize that sustainable performance is the measure that we're taking on as our business. And you're seeing the return on investments coming significantly faster because it's driven by global drive as well, by global demand rather, right? So for example, companies that are changing their operating models to reduce carbon emissions, then they have access maybe to export into Europe, where there's quite stringent guidelines in terms of what can be exported into those countries. You're seeing those who are shifting and reducing their carbon emissions. Now you're getting companies who are saying we have to track our ESG and our sustainability parameters. We can't work with companies that are still using diesel or fuel. We'll only work with companies who have changed their fleet into electronic vehicles, or at the very least, maybe changed into a transition into CNG. So organically, it's already starting to happen that those leaders who recognize that a sustainable approach is the way forward for sustainable performance, they're already starting to see the changes in terms of reaping those benefits. So the leadership mindset is already happening, Prudence. It will be a journey, but it's an organic one that we're seeing is starting to take stock faster and faster. But one final comment that I will say as well is that we have to recognize the private sector is significant, right? So whilst maybe we're talking about those who are sitting in the large corporate space, we also have SMEs and have MSMEs. There's a really critical role for the large corporates to play in terms of providing the catalysts that are required to actually bring up the MSMEs and SMEs to the level where they can actually also develop and impact the same models that we're talking about today. So a journey definitely that started, but still a lot of work to do.
Yes, thank you, Santina, for that. You have unpacked quite a lot, but we started by talking about the nuances between CSR and sustainability. That is the way forward. But you also cautioned us to weather through the short-term pain, but look at the long-term gain. Now, I want to move on to Dr. Crispin, and again, in the same length of looking at looking at the role that government plays in collaboration. There is a very common term when we talk about how government works with the private sector, and that is the triple P, the public-private partnership. But today, we've also looked at the 4 Ps, which is the private-public philanthropic partnership. Now, Dr. Crispin, I want you to tell us a bit in detail, though briefly, the role that the government plays in fostering collaboration that addresses climate resilience. Climate change is a big concern, not only for Tanzania, but globally. So tell us, what does the government play in ensuring that we mitigate climate risks in Tanzania and beyond? Karibu.
Okay, thank you very much. For the Vision 2050 explicitly, which elevates the environmental sustainability and climate change resilience as a core pillar for Tanzanian development, this is actually a forward-looking move, which recognizes that long-term prosperity, long-term development of a country must be achieved in harmony with nature. So actually, the vision sets the target for increasing forest cover, as I said earlier, protecting biodiversity, ensuring health wetlands and water resources, and building resilience against climate shock. So what role does the government actually plays? For the government leadership, actually this is the anchor for climate resilient collaboration. I would say first, the government actually sets the national vision through various frameworks like Tanzania Vision 2050. This actually gives stakeholders a shared destination. Where do we actually aspire to be there? A shared destination that we're supposed to go into this particular direction, or we're supposed to go into this particular direction. Also, the government actually convenes and coordinates various actors across ministries, across local governments, the private sector, the NGOs, the development partners, to ensure that if it is the projects or any activities that actually addresses the climate resilience issues are not fragmented, but they are actually mutually reinforced. So the government actually creates the enabling environment by actually enacting policies, incentives, and regulation that reward sustainable practices such as maybe renewable energy investment, climate smart agriculture, and ecosystem protection. So the government actually mobilizes and aligns the resources, blending domestic budgets, international climate finance, I would say private capital into joint investment plans. So the most important thing is the strong leadership that we have, which ensures accountability, results tracking transparently, so the citizen and partners see progress on how the issues of climate resilience are being addressed. So it is common that when the government leads with clarity, inclusiveness, and consistency, actually it becomes the catalyst that unites diverse efforts into a single powerful response to climate risk, turning ambition into real resilience for people, planet, and prosperity. So in a nutshell, I would say the government actually provide policy leadership and a strategic direction. They develop a clear national climate resilience strategy that will set a long-term objectives, targets, and sectoral priorities. You can see the government is actually integrating climate resilience into national development plans so that adaptation is not treated as a side project, but as a core driver of economic and social policy. Also, the government is, through the policy leadership and strategic direction, you can see it is issuing regulations, standards, and guidelines that promote resilient infrastructure, sustainable land use, and low carbon technologies. For example, I would say you can see the government has this national climate change response strategy, which actually mainstream climate resilience into agriculture, into water and infrastructure policies, which ensuring the ministries, they work toward the same adaptation priorities. Also, the government is actually, as I said earlier, it creates an enabling environment. Environment through regulatory incentives, through institutional frameworks, through legal clarity. When you talk about regulatory incentives in terms of tax breaks, subsidies, or risk sharing mechanism for climate resilient investments, speaking about the institutional frameworks, it means speaking about establishing a dedicated climate change units or agencies to coordinate action across ministries, and ensuring clear rules for public-private partnership, as it was said, that support resilient projects, reducing investor uncertainty. For example, in creating the enabling environment through the national PPP policy, you can see the government actually encourages private investment in renewable energy microgrids for rural areas by streaming licensing and offering VAT exemption on imported solar equipment. So the government actual role is so diverse and so many roles, like maybe convening and stakeholders engagement, as I said. They act as a central coordinator, as I said, between ministries, local authorities, private sector, NGOs, the community itself, to align efforts and avoid various duplication. Facilitating the multi-stakeholders, various platforms, supporting community-based adaptation, where the government is actually ensuring local voices shape national resilience issues. Okay, you can see through the convening and stakeholders engagement, actually the government is facilitating this Tanzania Climate Smart Agriculture Alliance, as I said, as it brings together the farmers groups, NGOs, research institution, and agribusiness to share innovation, especially in the drought-resistant farming areas. So basically, and in a nutshell, I would say these, among the few, these are the roles that the government leadership play in fostering collaboration that addresses climate resilience. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Crispin. We have less than half an hour before we close this exciting dialogue. And we have a Q&A shortly, but before we go into that, just one last round of questions, very briefly, to our speakers. The first one, going back to Santina, you shared such a great foresight with that new value equation that you brought to the fore, that sustainable approach equals to sustainable performance. Now, from your vantage point, when you look at the various programs that you've been privy to, what partnership have you seen or witnessed between business, government, and civil society that has really delivered the most measurable value? And why would you say that fits into that equation?
Thank you, Prudence. That's a tough one. And maybe if you'll allow, before I answer that question, because I know I won't get a chance, but I wanted to pick up on something that Justice alluded to earlier, was the question for him around trust. And also in terms of how we really need to work in terms of moving from there. But I think we need to share lessons learned, right? So before I go into the final question, it's how do we disseminate those lessons learned? And I think when we can have tangible and concrete information that's disseminated that shows success, that's when you can start to move forward in that issue of trust. And I think it's so critical. And the only reason I'm nasistizia, what Justice has said, is without that element of trust, everything becomes dialogue, and we will continue to work in the silos. We will continue to work in a non-collaborative manner, and the impact we're going to see it will be minimal. And everything is infringent on impact. I think everything we're speaking today on is about that. So sorry, just to say that. So Prudence, to your question, it's a really tough one, because I think there are a lot of initiatives that are small that we may not know about. And I think the ones that we end up knowing about are the ones that are big, that have maybe the capacity to be able to share those stories and share the communication. So again, to my final comment in terms of how do we communicate better, How do we give voices to those who are doing great things on ground? We may just not know simply because of the size, but they could be models that possibly could be done like a copy paste and show impact. If I had to pick one, I'd say SAGCOT, only because we've really worked very closely with them. We've had a lot of dialogue with them in the past under the leadership of Mr. Kirenga, who's been very inclusive, and I think he has a vantage point. I saw a comment about executive leadership, right? And I think he's a perfect example whereby his former government, he was given this mandate to transform the Southern Agricultural Corridor, SAGCOT, and he's done a brilliant job of bringing private sector into that discussion. So what that has realized is really the uplifting of smallholder farmers. It's given them access. It's allowed them to increase productivity, thus increasing incomes and livelihoods. A core KPI that we're all measuring in terms of where we want to be in the next 25 years. But I think critical to that is that he was able to bring the right people to the table. And in the sentiments of the discussion we're having now, it was all impinging on collaboration. And even though they're working within the agricultural sector, I think the success that they've had has been on them being able to bring private sector actors that are not agriculture, right? So whether it's the financial institutions, whether it's the manufacturers who can then now start within the agro processing. So you forced me to pick one, so I would pick that one, but I know there's so many, even at community level, I'm sure Justice could speak to some of these that are really doing great impactful things. We may just not know about them. So my final comment will be to Mwananchi Communications in terms of how do we get these stories out there? How do we share these lessons learned? How do we make sure, like for me, if I were to say that we've been successful for the next 25 years, is that every single Tanzanian is saying, this is my vision, and I can see how I can be reflected in this vision because I am a part of this journey. So I'll close on that. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Santina. And your question has been noted. Oftentimes, whenever there's any initiative, be it from the private or public sector, measuring impact is critical in understanding the progress that has been made, but also highlighting what are the gaps that need to be filled. And us as media, our core role is to tell stories that are of impact. So I welcome that, and we can find ways to collaborate. We often collaborate with different institutions. Now, let me move on to Dr. Crispin. Okay, so we're talking about, this is the final round of questions, so we're just summing it all up. We are looking at how policy reform could accelerate the multi-sector partnerships for inclusive growth and prosperity. I want us just to look at it from a critical angle. Can you just elaborate to us what are some of the policy reforms that are necessary for this to be achieved? The policy reforms in a multi-sector partnership. What does the government need to do to ensure that there is inclusive growth and prosperity?
Thank you very much. I would say there's a lot that is needed, and the government is doing a lot as well. But I'll speak out a few in the interest of time. For example, I would say we need to actually strengthen the legal framework for multi-sectoral collaboration. As you said, for example, building on the PPP Act, Tanzania could consider a more comprehensive partnership act or legal amendments with its strategy that broaden the scope of public-private collaboration. Vision 2050 actually gave private sector a priority, so they can actually, government actually remain to coordinate it. So for the PPP Act actually to explicitly accommodate some of the few issues, policy issues, for example, for the public-private community partnership, where communities or civil societies, they can have a defined role alongside the government and the investors. That can be one of the reform in the policies by maybe formalizing the community as a partner legally in the large projects, example, in the natural resource or infrastructure, which actually could include benefit sharing agreements or equity stakes for local communities as a legal requirement. I would say there are so many examples that some of the other countries have been doing that, and with so much being successfully experienced into that particular area. Also, I can give out my point into issues related to maybe decentralization and local partnership enablement. For example, the police structure reform, which could extend to empowering local governments and communities to engage into partnership involving or amending the Local Government Act or issuing new regulations that allow municipalities or districts to directly enter into PPPs or cooperative agreements with private investors and NGOs with a clear accountability frameworks. By bringing partnership to the local level, also considering the local content policies, development will be more responsive to community needs, which is people, and actually to the localized resource management, which is planet. And you can see into those two aspects and the three of the prosperity, you can see we need the collaboration into that. Speaking of the prosperity, maybe the issues related to trade and industrial development, we can have the policies which actually ensure inclusive participation of the private sector and the government to boost prosperity. Maybe multi-sectoral partnership, they can focus on value chain development, trade facilitation, and industrialization that includes local businesses. We have so many special economic zones, industrial parks. We can have policies that can, those special economic zones, they can be operated as public-private partnership. The government, they provide the land or basic infrastructure, while the private developers actually invest in factories or warehouses and operate the zone with both parties sharing revenue. So many policies, educational policies, to make sure that we attain the aspiration that are actually identified in the Vision 2050. So that's quite few. So I give a space to others. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Crispin. You mentioned that Tanzania should consider a more comprehensive partnership act, and that's one of my major key takeaway from today. Now back to Zuena. There's something that you said that really struck most of us here, or all of us here, that impact is a long game. It's a long-term game, and it needs quite a lot of skin in the game. But then if you could champion one bold multi-stakeholder initiative today, what will it be and what lasting impact will it have?
Thanks. Thank you, Prudence. So if I could champion one bold initiative, and it's a multi-stakeholder initiative today, I mean, it's not just myself, but or Vodacom. I think everyone in the technology space does understand that the next frontier is ensuring smartphone penetration, affordable devices, financial inclusion, both reach 100%. And to be able to achieve this, we will require policies that do encourage competition, can lower costs, but also allow for expansion of the digital infrastructure that's pertinent to achieving the vision that we want in 2050. And in doing so, we are ensuring that innovations are not just available, going back to my access and usage aspect, but they're also accessible to everyone, regardless of their age, of their ability, of their gender, and so forth. Now, we've heard from Dr. Crispin with regards to creating enabling environments for investors. We've heard from Dr. Crispin around climate smart agriculture, digital skills. And if I go back to my comments earlier, I would say that for us to be able to reach this digital transformation space that we want, the people are critical and we must involve them. And we can only involve them if we have pro-growth policies. To me, pro-growth policies will serve as a multiplier. And that one bold mission or one bold multi-stakeholder initiative today, I would request is that if the government can revisit the excise duty that is being charged to the telecom sector. The digital space, the data, availability of data, usage of data is not a sin. Excise duty in other translation is a sin tax. It's imperative that everyone has access to affordable connectivity, but also affordable devices so that we can achieve this vision together. So yeah, that one multi-stakeholder initiative today that we can champion and that one bold initiative we can champion is the removal or reduction of excise duty to the telecom sector, both on the data side as well as financial services. And for context purposes, perhaps, is that the telecom industry is the highest taxed industry here in Tanzania, and the excise duty charged to the telecom industry in Tanzania is the highest if we benchmark across the sub-Saharan market.
Oh, thank you, Zuena. I think you've used the platform to the best of your ability. You've talked about the excise duty reduction for the telecom sector, but also more critically, you talked about having pro-growth policies. And that ties in quite well to the next question that is being directed to Justice. Now, Justice, you're at the intersection between the private public sector, but also the NGOs. That's the CSO community. Now, when we talk about having policies that are impactful to the community, can you tell us, how does the civil society bridge that gap now between community priorities, national policy making in a way that accelerates inclusive growth? We've talked at length here about how growth in Tanzania needs to be inclusive. How does the CSO bridge this gap? Karibu, Justice.
Asante sana Mpoki. Quite similar to what I said in the beginning. But let me say what is central to this is citizen engagement and citizen participation. And I want to start by acknowledging first that there isn't a shortage of methodologies that have been proven to optimize citizen participation. And, you know, if you've existed in this NGO world, you know that we've practiced community scorecards for a few decades, social accountability monitoring, public expenditure tracking systems. All of these are systems that are that have been created to ensure that decision making is inclusive, and that's how you get to inclusive growth. And I think all of them hold a lot of promise, if implemented with intentionality, with political will, something that hasn't always been the case. So what I want to do is point to two conditions that I think will make the biggest difference in terms of integrating community voices and in terms of ensuring that is inclusive decision making within the country. So one idea is to have an open government at all levels. Often transparency, I think, is a value that is overlooked, but it's very foundational when it comes to open government. Citizens have to be in the loop when it comes to everything that pertains to their development and well-being. And I think to go back to a note you made, Mpoki, to link this to sustainability, this is the people aspect of sustainability. When you talk about our ultimate goal, in whatever language you use, it's always growth, impact, prosperity. All of that has people at the center, because no matter how impressive microeconomic indicators we achieve, it's completely meaningless if this wealth doesn't trickle down to those who need it the most, those at the bottom of the pyramid. So if it doesn't translate into poverty reduction, then it's actually futile and it's unsustainable. So this is about sustainability and the people aspect of sustainability. So we have a catchphrase in the development world, nothing about us without us. And I think this is what it's really about. If you want our citizens to truly own the development agenda, and this is, I'm talking about conditions now for inclusive growth, If we want them to own the development agenda, then we have to keep them adequately informed and engaged at all levels when it comes to every decision that pertains to their development. So the idea of open government is quite essential. And let me say that Tanzania was one of the first signatories of the open government partnership back, I think, in that period between 2010 and 2015, before we pulled out. It's really important that we go back to observing the principle of open government, because that is what will actually lead us to inclusive growth. The second condition that I want to talk about is really the importance of recognizing citizen-generated data in the official system. If we're going to continue to rely on the so-called national official statistics, then we're setting ourselves up to ignore citizens' voices. So I initially spoke about listening infrastructure and how that is important. So I'm not simplifying it, saying that let's have a situation where the creation of statistics and knowledge is completely democratized. No, that is not the goal, because I think that can lead to chaos. But what I'm trying to suggest is that we, within the country, have enough resources, we have enough skills to ensure that we have think tanks. Then this can be civil society, can be in academia. In fact, they can even be in private sector. The think tanks can really help us, because they will be rooted in hardcore evidence that can inform policy, but it's important that they are recognized as part of official statistics. So I sit in the National Steering Committee of an initiative called Data and Evidence to End Extreme Poverty. It's an initiative by Oxford Policy Management. What it really does is it seeks to bridge that gap between evidence and policy. And from it, one of the things that I've picked up recently is that there is no shortage of methodologies that can enable even the most basic of researchers, some of them even a basic citizen with a smartphone, to gather, but also provide highly reliable poverty estimates and other data that can completely transform how we plan, how we implement, and how we measure our development progress. So we need to appreciate that the production of knowledge, data, and statistics is not the government's sole preserve. It's not something that should be exclusive to, let's say, the National Bureau of Statistics and others. The more we expand that field, the better we are informed, and the better positioned we are to catalyze inclusive growth within the country. But again, I'll go back to getting there takes a lot of trust, and it takes a lot of partnership, because we have to really believe in each other. We have to work with each other. So it's important that we begin to work together towards that direction. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Justice. Our last question before we enter into the Q&A is for Dr. Crispin. And as Zuena mentioned, the importance of having pro-growth policies in place. Well, what policy reforms are underway which will really accelerate multi-sector partnerships for inclusive growth and prosperity?
I think I already responded to that question.
That's good. If you could summarize it briefly for us so that we can segue into our audience for questions, just to really piggyback on what Zuen has mentioned. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I actually spoke about the strengthening the legal framework for multi-sectoral collaboration. And I gave an example on the PPP Act. Of course, as far as I know right now, there are those initiatives to consider a more comprehensive PPP Act. I think the work is underway, or it's going to proceed maybe in a few days to come, which actually is, I gave also my insight onto this. I also spoke about the decentralization and local partnership enablement, like reviewing of the Local Government Act, just to empower the local government and communities to engage into various partnership. That's what I said. It means you bring the partnership to the local level. In the way of developing, development will be more responsive to community needs, which is people, and localized resource management, which is planet. Also, I spoke in the perspective of prosperity, that we can have the policies that actually ensures inclusive participation in terms of trade and industrial development in the country, especially maybe in the areas of special economic zones and industrial parks that can be operated as public-private partnership, and the government is actually provides lands or basic infrastructure, while the private developers invest in these industries or factories or warehouses, and they operate the zone with both parties, the government, the private sector, sharing the revenue. So that's a nutshell, as I took my insight into the PPP, into the Local Government Act. I also said about some policies reform into education that will actually result into relevant market skills that are needed to achieve the aspiration of the TDV 2050 and so forth. So there's a lot of initiatives are also ongoing. And I think to strengthen, this is what I can actually provide. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Crispin, for that summation. You have put it briefly, but very clearly understood. We're now moving over to the contributions that have been put forward by the audiences, both in the comment section, but also the ones who have tuned in live via Zoom. Unfortunately, in the interest of time, we won't be able to read all the questions and all the comments that have been shared. There are about 11 of them on the comment section, but we are going to select a few. If I'm to begin with one which was shared about an hour ago, and staying with you, Dr. Crispin, I think this is very pertinent to our conversation today because we've talked at length about the role that the youth plays. So one of the questions here reads that youth contributed 75% of Vision 2050. I believe that the meaning is that the focus for the Vision 2050 is sustainability as far as posterity is concerned for the next generation. Now, how do you engage them in knowing their role in achieving Vision 2050? How do we engage youth? Now, this goes to Dr. Crispin because you represent the government, and as part of in the governing mandate, how do you ensure that the views or the interest of youth are factored in the Vision 2050? If you can briefly answer that, and we move on to other comments.
Okay, thank you very much. I think youth, firstly, I would say they've been engaged from the onset when we started to develop the Vision 2050. But if I respond directly to that particular question, I would say first, maybe in the policy and institutional engagement. For example, youth policy alignment. We need to ensure that the Vision 2050 strategies are harmonized with the National Youth Development Policy. So youth priorities are mainstreamed into all sectors. Also, into the policy and institutional engagement, youth advisory councils that can be established, formal platforms at national and local levels where youth representative advise on policies, monitor implementation, and give feedback. We have those platforms and reserved representation. They have representation in strategic committees, you can see in the parliament, into various aspects. Also, I would say maybe into the innovation and entrepreneurship, especially in the youth innovation funds, public-private funds, offering grants, seed capital, mentoring for youth, lead business, tackling national priorities, for example, food security, or clean energy and logistics. So there are so many ways that the government actually engage youth in realization of or achieving of the Vision 2050. That's in summary. I can also proceed maybe if we still have time, in the education as well. Youth are engaged in terms of curriculum reforms. Youth are engaged in terms of technical and vocational education and training. By expanding green skills, you can see high-tech training, which are mostly linked to growth sectors, such as the renewables or manufacturing or creative economy. So youth are in summary, I can say maybe youth, they can be engaged into policy and institutional engagement. They can be engaged into innovation and entrepreneurship with examples I provided, as well as into the issues that related to education, skills, and maybe future readiness in terms of technological changes as it changes every day. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Crispin. We have a question from Christopher Shayo to Zuena Farah. It says, in your experience, what are some challenges that you as an organization face in getting the right partners who share the same understanding and the urgency for sustainability concerns? Ones who are in it for the right reasons, that is impact versus publicity. How do you go about that?
Thank you, Zoe, and thank you, Krista, for that question. I think just really touched on that question with regards to money and visibility. It is one of the biggest challenges that we face when we're looking for the right partners. But I think also Santina touched on moving from corporate social responsibility to more of corporate social investments. And initially, when I had mentioned that impact is a long game, it's precisely what I meant. Is that when we choose programs or projects that we want to invest in, it is not just a once-off donation, and then we just look at who we have helped and how we publicize that. But it comes with the impact. We always ask ourselves who, and then we ask ourselves, what exactly are we doing to change lives or to improve lives? And then the third question is always how. And I think those three questions sort of shape the idea of how we want or we want to see impact in a specific society. But it's also the same questions that we ask our partners. And a good example is just recently we signed a 3-year MOU, tripartite MOU between ourselves, a cycling club, as well as Stanbic, one of our partners. And that goes to show that it's not just about once-off engagement, it's a long-term investment that we want to see. But I also talked about impact. It's not something that you just realize overnight. It needs time, it needs investment, it needs thought leadership, it needs quite a lot. Innovation in itself is not enough. We really need to invest our times and our efforts to realize that. On money, visibility, shared value, impact-driven versus purpose-led. I know we always talk about, we use that word purpose very easily or very loosely and say that we are a purpose-led company or a purpose-driven company. But I think it's also imperative when we have these discussions with partners that we talk about impact-driven projects or programs that we want to deploy. On thought leadership, I talked about that. And last but not least, even in real life, when you're building relationships, we're talking about how we do not want transactional relationships. I'm not only shaking your hand just because I want to be seen. I'm not only shaking your hand because I want this out of you. I'm shaking your hand because I believe that two people have greater impact in the society than just me, myself, going in that same lane. So, yeah.
Amazing. Thank you, Zuena. I like that you say that it should not be transactional. There is this new theory in the resource mobilization space that talks about friend raising before fundraising. And I think that's where you build the trust. You build the trust. And I remember Justice mentioned about when you're putting a partnership together, intentions are very important. And you've provided us quite a good way of checking your intentions, quite a good framework, understanding the who, the what, and the how. And I believe that will be really, will create the baseline for realizing the why that you set out together with your partners for that long-term impact. And now let's move to our audience. Because of time, we're just going to take 2 questions at random selection. If you could raise your hand, one for Justice Rutenge. So if you have a question for Justice Rutenge, just kindly raise your hand and we will move the floor to you. Over to you. Just raise your hand from the audience if you have a question for Justice. I see Rahman Yahaya, karibu sana. You can unmute yourself and speak. Karibu Rahman.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. And my name is Rahman Yahya, a student in University of Dar es Salaam. My question is right there in the question tag, and it's just asking like, how is inclusivity taken into action as we people with disability are eager to reach and to be part of the development towards 2050 or development vision towards 2050. So how private organization and also government organization uh, holding these people with disability and making them privileged in different development matters. Thank you.
Thank you, Rahman. Over to you, Justice.
Yeah, thank you for that important question, Rahman. And I think I will emphasize what I've spoken about in my entire thesis during this dialogue, that we need to include everyone in development processes. Development that leaves certain parts of the population behind isn't meaningful at all. And for us, particularly in the civil society sector, we look at people with disabilities as one of the key populations that are marginalized, and we do a lot to ensure that their voices are also included. So we had a discussion a few months ago during the Summit of the Future where I exposed the audience to the fact that if you look at the statistics in Tanzania, about 11% of people are identified with to be with a disability, and that 11% translates to a population that is more than the population of Dar es Salaam, the most populous city in the country, and it's above the population of every other region in this country. So when you realize that, you begin to realize that this is a population that should not be left behind. So it is upon us, and I'm glad that we're having these conversations along, the likes of Vodacom, private sector organizations, and public institutions to ensure that that agenda on inclusion of all the key populations that are marginalized is really, we turn our attention towards them so that we don't leave them behind when it comes to all these development processes. And let me say also that when we engaged in the DERA 2050 process, one of our core areas of focus was to ensure that the voices of these groups, and especially for us, we're talking about youth, we're talking about women and people with disabilities, their voices are not left behind, because we work very closely with them, and we also represent them in many ways. Yeah, so inclusivity in all its aspects is quite important, and something that should be taken into account as when we talk about people, planet, and prosperity in general.
Thank you so much, Justice. One last question from the audience for Santina. If you have one question for Santina, please raise up your hand. We have Roy. Okay, so we have a question on circular economy from Santina on the comments. It's from Liberata Kawamala, and she says that, how is the private sector supporting, or is there any incentive to support waste pickers or any person or organization that's really working to keep up to keep the environment clean and safe? What are you guys doing within that circular economy, Santina? Over to you.
Thank you for that question. So I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think we have not been able to bring everyone onto this journey. And I think what we need to do is look at what is the business case for that. And we know that there is actually, there's a factory that's actually collecting it's recycled waste, plastic recycled waste. And they've built a whole model where if you are delivering back these recycled waste through to them, they'll process it and it's actually becoming, they're making it chips and into floor material. So they found a business case for it. So as CEO Roundtable, our role could be connecting and bringing those two parties together. But also for those who are doing this work, which I think we need to shift that it's not necessarily a good to do, right? It shouldn't be that we're trying to keep the environment clean and therefore we're picking up waste. But what is that business model linked to that activity or that initiative? And when you start connecting the business case for all these activities, that's when you look at productivity, that's when it impacts people, because we're now seeing that private sector saying, we have an opportunity to maybe offset our carbon footprint, right? So when you're talking about climate, standard manufacturer, high carbon emissions, what can we do? These are some of the models they've started to adopt to say, okay, if we recycle plastic, we can offset some of our carbon emissions and therefore get some credits for that, some carbon credits. So it's about understanding what's there. And it goes back to one of my original points where is this information sitting? All of us need to do a lot more with sharing the information to show that actually, if your innovation is X, or if you have an idea in terms of how to help the climate increase productivity, whatever it may be, how do you link to maybe an existing company that's doing something in there that can actually make your work profitable? And we're challenging our members to share more information, to share stories. I've challenged Mwananchi to also share these stories. And it's not about just, I think education doesn't just sit with academia. We know, for example, the civil society is doing a lot of work on ground, but I think it also sits with all of us collectively sharing our stories again and again, even just at an individual level where you can say, I had success in being able to implement this initiative. When we start looking at some of these areas, I mentioned that we have some initiatives that are specifically on climate. It wasn't our area of expertise at all. But what we found is that there's so much already happening on ground. No one is sharing these stories, and we're having to sort of incentivize storytelling through case studies, et cetera, to show what's possible. So the more we can develop on that and build on that and show what's actually available, I think that's where we can see some value.
Yes, thank you, Santina, for those last words. It has been a very engaging conversation today. We've talked about sustainability, and we've looked at the critical role that is played by the private sector, by the public sector. But at the end of the day, we're looking at impact and how the Tanzanian community gets to benefit in all the sustainability efforts that are being undertaken by the various sectors in the ecosystem. We are out of time for today's session. We were supposed to end at 3:30. It's now 18 minutes past 3:30. We are at 3:48. I would like to thank everyone for participating and for just making this as engaging as possible. Mwananchi, the citizen, will continue this conversation on our platforms. And we want to send a special thanks to Vodacom, who are marking 25 years since being established in Tanzania, for partnering with us to drive this very important conversation to the public. As I mentioned, this is not the end of the dialogue. We will continue to bring this to the public. So thank you very much. Prudence, over to you to close the session.
Thank you so much. I would like to invite Zoe Farah to give us a vote of thanks in closing.
Thank you, Prudence. Thank you, Poki, and thanks everyone for making time. I think this was a great conversation. It goes without saying, dialogues are nice, but action is much, much better. So I hope that we can borrow something or two that we have shared here today on this platform, and that's the whole idea. How can we exchange ideas? How can we talk to one another, but also work together eventually? I'd really like to stress on Santina's point around sharing stories. We will keep working in silos. We will keep working, doing the same thing, but in different corners of Tanzania if we don't hear these stories. Once we hear these stories, people are more and more encouraged in supporting them. So I do hope the media platforms, Mpoki, Prudence, everybody that's listening out there, please go out there, give us some more stories around the impact, the work that people are doing. Youth are doing a great job. And I will tell you, one of the platforms, CSO Week, we were able to work with more than 130 youth-led organizations that are driving impactful work across different sectors, from economic empowerment, agriculture, gender equality, education, and so forth. And those are starting points for many of us. But we do understand the likes of Mwananchi, with the great reach that you do have. We are your readers, and there are many other readers out there. So we hope to see more stories there. I would really like to appreciate everyone that has joined us today and gave us an hour and a half to listen to us, but also those that have asked us questions and challenged us to rethink or think or better think some of the work that we are doing. To the panelists, thank you for being with us. This was quite insightful, and I look forward to seeing you more in different corridors and working together eventually. On behalf of Vodacom, the board of directors, the management as well as leadership at Mwananchi, I'd like to thank you all. Asanteni sana.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, and have a good evening.
All right, bye-bye.